The GTX Titan X, the original $1,000 performance beast. This thing back in the day was considered the 4090 of 2015 era of GPUs. Back in the day, this was a computer enthusiast's dream to get their hands on, and sometimes you would even see 4 of them in a quad SLI build back in the day. We're going to be looking at a retrospective of the graphics card and seeing what it's capable of doing today in 2024. Hello everyone, my name's Nick, I'm the GPU enthusiast, and today we're going to be looking at the GTX Titan X. Stay tuned. The GTX Titan X. Now, this is specifically the Maxwell 2.0 version. There is a Titan X Pascal version, which essentially is the Titan X of the 10 series GeForce GTX GPUs, and this is essentially the 9 series, so the 9060, 9070, 9080 GPUs, part of that generation. This GPU used to go for $999 when it first came out. You can get them for varying prices used. I got a sick deal on this one for about $40 on eBay. Now, I took a gamble. It was untested, so it was very likely that this thing could have been broken and not working. And to my luck, it came out perfectly fine. It worked as soon as I plugged it in. I didn't have to do anything to it. I ran it through various stress tests, and it worked. The only thing, and it's most likely because this is a blower GPU with a single fan, is it does run a little hot. Now, not hot to the point where it's malfunctioning or thermal throttling, but hotter than I would normally like a GPU to be running at max speed. Now, I did test a bunch of games on this GPU to see what the performance is in 2024, and it's decent, and we'll see at the numbers here. This GPU, back in the day, was a big leap. This GPU came with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which was a lot for back in the day. I know today most GPUs, good ones at least, come standard with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but back in the day, 12 gigabytes of VRAM was a lot of VRAM. For instance, the 3080 Ti only came with 6 gigabytes of VRAM, and this was double that VRAM. This thing was a workplace beast. This thing was great for video rendering back in the day and video editing and all this other kind of jazz that you were doing. So this was primarily advertised as a workstation or workplace GPU. It wasn't considered a gaming GPU. Of course, people bought it for gaming reasons, and like I said in the intro, a lot of people, or enthusiasts, I should say, would buy multiple of these and make SLI, either dual SLI or quad SLI builds of this GPU, which is absolutely crazy if we're thinking about it, because you'd be spending $4,000 on 4 separate GPUs for, even back in the day, the performance that you would get from a quad or even dual SLI build was not great for price for performance, but it was cool, and it's still cool today, honestly, if I'm being honest here. It's still cool to see an SLI build, even though it makes absolutely no sense. On top of the drawbacks being you barely got any extra performance in these SLI builds, the power consumption that you would be basically consuming was insane. You'd be pulling so much power for, again, barely any extra performance. Now today, SLI is dead, and there are barely any games that support it or that are relevant. So having an SLI build doesn't make much sense. How does this GPU hold up in 2024? Well, we're about to see that now. This GPU is decent for the modern era. If you were to have bought this back in 2015, you still have it, or upgraded your system and just migrated this GPU over to the newer system, you'd still see some pretty decent performance, which you're going to see now in a moment. I do want to state that I do not recommend buying this GPU used today. Again, I took a gamble on a pretty good deal, and it did happen to work, and for $40, this GPU is, in my opinion, a steal, but I wouldn't recommend buying one that's advertised as used and that's working comparative to the other price per performance GPUs that you can get in the same price range used. You can get something a lot more modern and something that runs a lot better and doesn't consume as much power as, again, that to say, if you do have one of these still, and you're not super concerned about getting, running on high settings on every game and getting the maximum amount of FPS that you can get out of your games, you can still have a very playable, enjoyable experience, even on a lot of modern titles, and even titles where you're going to want FPS. So we're going to get into the graphs and performance of this GPU on modern games. So in this part of the video, I'm going to have the performance differences in all the games on 2 different settings. We're going to be testing all these games on either low or high settings. On Apex Legends, we started with on high settings, we had 141 FPS max, a 106 average, and a 66 FPS 1% low. So on Apex Legends on low settings, we had a 144 FPS max. Now that's because Apex Legends, for whatever reason, doesn't go above the max refresh rate on my monitor. We had an average of 135 FPS and a low of 90 FPS. On CS2, we had 169 FPS max with 148 average and a 94 FPS low. On high settings, on low settings, you can see it there on the graph. I'm not going to continue to reiterate the performance. You can see the performance is definitely a lot better on low, but the 1% low is still not that much better. But again, CS2 is not a very graphically intensive game. Moving on to Warzone. Warzone, you can tell there really isn't a difference between low and high settings. There's a little bit of a bump in low settings, but for the most part, you're going to see the same kind of performance. EMG drive, there is a huge difference between the high and low settings, and mainly because high settings in this game does render a lot of foliage. In the test we did the, I believe the Island Mountain Trail tends to have a lot of foliage being rendered, and if you're running it on high settings, it can lag any GPU and lower that performance. Moving on to Ready or Not, the performance difference, again, not being huge with comparative to high and low settings, but definitely you can see low settings getting more FPS and especially more average FPS. Still a very good experience on both. Then we have Cyberpunk 2077. This is where you can start to tell in a more modern title that this GPU starts to struggle a little bit, as we on high settings can only get about an average of 54 and our low is all the way down at 37 FPS. Now with that said, if you bump the settings down to low, you hit that above 60 FPS mark pretty consistently, with only dipping in the 1% low at 57 FPS. Both presets I consider to be playable for Cyberpunk, but the fact that this GPU from 2015 can play Cyberpunk 2077 at a decent frame rate on both settings is pretty astonishing, and shows you the power that this thing actually has. Looking at a Sanzo World War I, the Italian front, you can tell that, again, this is pretty similar on both settings. You get a little more FPS on the low settings, where you're hitting over 100, but the 1% lows tends to kind of stay the same. You're not getting a huge difference. On Halo Infinite, I can tell you that the FPS on high settings wasn't too bad, but it wasn't very playable for a shooter like Halo. Dropping that to low, though, really improved the performance and just the ultimate smoothness of the game. So definitely playable on low settings. And then we finish off with Red Dead Redemption 2, which kind of had similar settings again, comparative to high and low. Not a whole lot of FPS difference there. You weren't getting a huge bump by cranking down the settings or cranking them up. So even on high settings, Red Dead Redemption 2 was pretty playable on the Titan X. Now, what do I have to say about the Titan X in 2024 after looking at the performance? And that is, if you bought this card back in 2015 and you're still using it today, it's a pretty good investment, probably a great investment. You're looking at almost 10 years of this GPU existing, and let's say you upgraded your CPU, which you probably have since that point, and you migrated this GPU to your new system. This GPU still does a great job for you on a lot of more modern titles or just games in general. With that said, going back all the way to 2015 and spending $1,000 on a GPU sounded crazy. Like I said, I wouldn't recommend buying this used if you're looking to build a budget system. There's a lot of better options for the same price, or for a little more that are more modern and will probably last a lot longer. Again, back in the day when I upgraded to a 970 back in 2015, getting something like this would have been a pipe dream for me as a kid. And being able to, test it and try it out now in 2024, even though it is a very old GPU, has been quite the experience. So with that said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to leave links to different videos that different creators did in the past back in 2015 reviewing this GPU, kind of giving you a gauge of what they thought back then and comparative to now. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Consider leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. It helps me out a lot with the algorithm and knowing if you guys are enjoying these videos or not. And I love the feedback too, guys. I just love conversing with you guys in the comment section, so feel free to leave a comment and open up a conversation. I'm an open book. So again, like I said, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a great day.